Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the launch of LSE Entrepreneurship. It is quite a historic day, but before we get into any of that, the good news is that there's only going to be 3 speakers this evening. They're not going to speak very long. We have Craig Calhoun, who's the director of the LSE, and he'll give us a little bit about the background to the launch of this unit. I will then identify some of the mission and some of the plans and activities that we've got in mind for this unit. And then we have our guest speaker, Eric Spangenberg. He's going to talk to us about getting started. Part of that, I think, will be lessons that he's learned from his entrepreneurial and professional career. After that, we'll have question and answers, and that'll then take us to the time when we'll walk over to another part of the LSE where we'll have drinks and a reception, and you'll be able to network. For now, let me welcome Craig, who's going to address us on the background to this meeting.
Well, good evening. Mostly I'm just going to say welcome because I don't want to take time away from Eric Spangenberg. But let me say just a couple of other things. One of them is thanks to Eric, to be sure, but to everybody who has been a part of making LSE Entrepreneurship happen. This is something I think is important and exciting for the school. And I want to both express the gratitude that I have for a range of different people and a little sense of inspiration from them. So there are a range of people, and I'll come back to Eric in a moment, but I want to thank Jenny Blakesley, who has for a number of years been working with our student entrepreneurs in the careers office. And first off, just conceptualizing that this is actually a career choice, that this is a way to plan and to organize your life. This is something that students can see as possible, not just look at a variety of predefined career options. Say, oh, well, I did law, or I did media and communications, or I did whatever, and therefore there's a set career. But rather, you can make your career, you can design it, you can rethink what it is you want to create in the world and go into that. So I'm very grateful to the work Jenny's been doing for a number of years. And I would give all the credit to Jenny for that, but actually I'd like to say I'm grateful to the students, because students made the Entrepreneurship Society one of the largest societies at LSE. It passed the Tequila Society. That was impressive, right? It became a very important part of student life at the LSE. I'd like to thank the students, moreover, for pushing us, the faculty, to say this is important. What we want out of an education is partly the opportunity and the ability to be able to change the world and to create opportunities for ourselves through creating business organizations or social entrepreneurship or other kinds of activities that are new, that didn't exist before. I want to thank a variety of corporate sponsors who've sponsored prizes and startup funds, and a variety of individual alumni who have also been angel investors for students who are starting businesses at the LSE. This initiative, right, has been growing, and it's been growing slightly subterranean way, but it's now becoming public. So we've had a range of supporters who've helped to make it happen. I want to thank teachers who worked the theme of entrepreneurship into a variety of different courses and continue to do that. Part of what we think about entrepreneurship as at LSE is it's not just one single course, like, oh, here in a department we have the course for training entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs can come out of any course at the LSE. You know, one of my favorite examples, an LSE entrepreneur came to study law, right, and started an ice cream company, right? What's the key part about that is he was Italian. He came to England, he sampled the local ice cream, and he said, business opportunity, right? And then, right, he formed connections at LSE, right? His connections at LSE were partly that it's not skills alone, it's connections. They were to people who helped him connect in finance, helped him figure out how to get marketing expertise, so that the opportunity that's created by the LSE isn't limited to technical skills in one department. It's great that we now have thinking like an entrepreneur, and we will have more and more courses. But this is something across the school. It's something that anyone can enter from a variety of different backgrounds and can benefit from thinking like an entrepreneur, the course that Al Bimani is developing. So I want to thank all of the faculty members who've brought this into one or another aspects of how they teach and indicate we're going to do more. I want to thank the people who've been involved in the actual organizing of this new initiative. Thank Al Bimani most of all, Sal Estrin, who is here, and the others who've been a part of organizing this initiative, of making it happen. It hasn't always been easy. I know that it's just been a barrel of fun most of the time, but it has involved going against some traditions. Going against traditions in the LSE, going against traditions in British society to some extent, to say this is a career for graduates of the most selective university in the country. This is an important part of the future of the country. Now, just a couple more points there. There are some distinctive LSE ways to how we're thinking about entrepreneurship. One of them is that we are embracing the whole range of kinds of entrepreneurial activities that can be part of making the future, part of creating different society, different economy in the future. So this includes people whose objective is linked to technology, but not everything is linked to operationalizing new technologies. Some of the business opportunities people will pursue are not based on commercializing technology, just on other things. This includes people who are planning social entrepreneurship agendas, including for-profit social entrepreneurship, because the only way to sustain the agenda that they have is to have a revenue stream. It includes people who are very committed to profit and to creating a business that will make them rich, make investors rich, and make a difference in the world through what it creates or what it sells. And it includes people who come from finance, who will be very closely related to entrepreneurship because they will be investing or guiding the funding of entrepreneurial organizations. So it cuts across a lot of different dimensions of the school. It's also about London. So this is about people who will go to Shoreditch and create one of the stereotypical startups of London. But it's also about a variety of other cities around the world, and particularly cities, because these are the homes to most of these organizations. It's about economic development, because we think this is part of how the transformation of economies in Africa, in Latin America, and other places can occur. So the LSE agenda for entrepreneurship is partly connected to these other LSE long-time agendas, like economic development, like understanding how economies work, and like dealing in finance. So we see this as local, global, at the same time. Right? We see it as embracing all sorts of agendas. Now, my last bit of thanks on this, and I'll get out of the way here, is to thank Eric Spangenberg, who's our speaker for tonight. So first off, thanks for coming to Agree to Share Opportunities, who is a key supporter of the entrepreneurship initiative. And by supporter, I mean, as often is the case, he's sort of an angel investor himself for this particular project. But he's also an advocate for it. And he joins with a number of other alumni who've said, we need this. We need this to be part of the LSE. And we want to help this happen, help the students and help the school, but also help the world, because the students who become the entrepreneurs are going to go out and create a vital, vibrant, economically productive, socially transformative future for themselves, first of all, for yourselves, and for a variety of others. So I think this is one of the most exciting new initiatives that we have at the LSE, and I'm hugely grateful to everybody who's helped to make it a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Now, about 120 years ago, 4 people sat around a table at breakfast, and they decided to fund a new project. And they had about £20,000, and they founded the LSE. The attempt was to basically create a better society. And I think there's been fairly numerous successes of that at the LSE over the past 120 years. Our objective at LSE Entrepreneurship is in fact to enhance society through innovation. So we want to provoke thought and action that essentially creates value, social value, economic value, human value. That's the basic mission statement that we have. If students come to the LSE to basically understand the causes of things, we want students to come to the LSE and through LSE Entrepreneurship to create extraordinary things. So that's ultimately what we're about. Now, if we think about LSE Entrepreneurship, one question that I'm asked is sort of why now? And there's many answers to that. One is that the LSE likes to think before it acts, and sometimes it likes to think for quite a while. But I think there are some global changes that are taking place, which I think makes this a very good moment. If we look at the emerging world, maybe 40, 50, 60, in some countries 70% of individuals are entrepreneurs. They're micro-entrepreneurs. They don't necessarily want to be entrepreneurs, but it's out of compulsion rather than choice. If we look at the US recently, we kind of hear the message that the US are kind of okay with risk, and citizens like to engage in risk and like to think of success as being basically tied to learning from failures. But interestingly, there are some studies which now suggest that every American man is likely to spend 1 or more years in self-employment by the time he retires. So things are shifting, I think, also in the West. I think we're nearing an environment where you actually have to engage in some form of self-employment because professionalization of education is starting to change, and it's starting to have a different impact in what people see as career opportunities. A study recently in the UK suggested that 72% of people here think about starting a business. Ultimately, only 7% start businesses. In the US, it's maybe 12, 13%. The interesting thing, I think, is that a lot of over 50s now are starting businesses. The UK has the highest rate of business startups by individuals who are over the age of 50. So there are demographic type changes. If we look at the Fortune 500, about 5% of CEOs in Fortune 500 are women. If you look at women entrepreneurs, about 40% of entrepreneurs are women. So things are changing. Women have been enabled, have been empowered, but empowering the world to basically create innovations through entrepreneurship. So I think we're starting to see a variety of changes globally that are sort of suggesting that entrepreneurship is becoming an increasingly important component of education. If we look at broader trends, urbanization is one of the biggest trends that we're witnessing today. If you look at emerging economies, the suggestion is that within 30 years, 80% of individuals in emerging economies will be living in large cities. 15 years from now, we're told that there'll be about 400 new cities, which will be contributing about 40% of global GNP. These are essentially aggregations of a large number of individuals, which will suggest that we have value creation opportunities. The world is very fast changing. LSE graduates are entering that world. I suspect within the next 10 to 15 years, they'll want to be equipped and armed with a sort of understanding of the potential for value creation that these changing trends represent. One of the biggest trends that I think has affected all of us is digitization and the rise of the internet economy. We can think of high-impact ventures such as Apple or Google or Amazon or Facebook, and of course they're extraordinary successes. But those successes have also, in a sense, mobilized a whole ecosystem of micro-entrepreneurs. PayPal, for instance, allows you to set up a business overnight and start to trade and start to earn. So does Amazon, so does Facebook, and so on. So we find that innovations over the past 10 years have created new ecosystems that enable individuals to partake in the entrepreneurship economy. Today's entrepreneurs, some of them will succeed in creating high-impact entrepreneurial endeavors, such as Apple, such as Facebook. A good case in point is WhatsApp. These are organizations that started as micro-organizations, and they're going to create the future for a new generation of entrepreneurs. So what we're about here is to really not just equip individuals with business skills that allow them to become better entrepreneurs. What we want to do at LSE Entrepreneurship is, in a sense, prefer an understanding of the changing shape of the globe in order to unravel opportunities that may be sort of deemed to be entrepreneurial. If we look at democracies, of course, the world is fast changing. We've seen all sorts of changes in the past sort of 5-6 years. But there is one important change that's taking place, and that's the democratization of entrepreneurship. Almost anyone with a credit card can now become an entrepreneur overnight. You can create your website, you can create all sorts of possibilities for generating value simply by sitting in front of a screen, and increasingly by tying what's in front of your screen vis-a-vis what exists as hardware industrially. So we're in a very fast-changing society. So LSE Entrepreneurship is really an attempt to unravel before your eyes some of these changes that are taking place, and to equip you with the wherewithal to engender further entrepreneurial value creation. What can you expect at LSE Entrepreneurship this year? Our course, which Craig mentioned, is a course centered around why entrepreneurship matters. And we've got a series of quite interesting individuals, some who are entrepreneurs, some who speak to entrepreneurship issues, some who are social commentators, others who have an understanding of equity, venture capital, fundraising. There are some who are sort of innovators in their own right. And we want to explore you to a wide multitude of thinking relating to entrepreneurship matters. What we also plan to do is to engage in debates that we hope will shape public policy. So we'll have a variety of debates centered around very specific themes, for instance, cybersecurity, financial infrastructures, gender issues, education, and so on, which directly impact entrepreneurship. We're going to have networking events, and typically students come to those because we offer free drinks. But we hope that they'll come also to mingle and interact with others. If you listen to entrepreneurs, they tend to tell you very different things. But the one thing that every entrepreneur that I've met agree on is that one of the most important things for success is networking. You have to network. And that's something that we aim to provide you through LSE Entrepreneurship. Now, as Craig mentioned, entrepreneurship is not new to the LSE. We've had academic courses, and they're ongoing, and they're very successful. We have summer school courses, we have executive courses. We also have a huge arm of LSE careers called Generate, which has a multitude of programs and events and master classes, and boot camps and networking sort of opportunities and so on. All of that tallies with what we want to do in terms of thinking about the potential of entrepreneurship. Other parts of the LSE will provide the body through which you can put into action some of that thinking. I wanted to briefly identify some of the speakers at our open course. So we have Lance Ugla, who was an LSE graduate. He had set up a firm called Market, perhaps out of the idea that you could not unravel certain types of information which he thought was desperately needed at the time. He created a large organization. It had its IPO fairly recently, and Lance Ugla is going to come and speak to us in November. Zoltan X, who is a distinguished professor from the US, spending time at the LSE, a real sort of expert on entrepreneurship matters in the academic literature, and also in terms of emerging economies and the impact of entrepreneurship in those types of settings. Pamela Hartigan is heading the Skoll Centre at Oxford University. She's going to speak to social entrepreneurship issues. We have Mathuli Nkubi, who was at one stage an LSE lecturer here. and went on to do many things, including being chief economist at the African Development Bank, and has a real sense of the entrepreneurship pulse in emerging economies again. And we have a number of other individuals. Duncan Clark, who was advisor to the Alibaba pre-IPO days. Wal Kolade, who's going to speak to us about financing and issues. And Lisa Bridget, who is a global sales manager at Net-a-Porter, and again a real expert on digital issues. So we have speakers. This is a course that students in a third year and master's students will be able to take. It doesn't lead to a specific degree, but it does lead to certification from our new unit. So we hope that some of you will register for that. I think registration opens at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning if you're so inclined. Now, what I wanted to do was to say a few words about our guest speaker. Eric is a long-time friend of the LSE. He did his first degree in economics at Skidmore College, and a professor there suggested that he might look at the LSE, so he came here for a master's degree. I think he'll have one or two stories to tell about that. He then went on to law school at Case Western Reserve University, after which he had a number of postings in law firms, investment banks, telecommunications industry. He was CEO of an organization at one stage before he set up his own organization, which deals with intellectual property. Eric and his wife Audrey and their son Christian have a long history of philanthropic activity. They've donated to numerous causes, some to do with children's healthcare, some to do with women issues and the prevention of the abuse of women in different countries. They've also set up chairs, they've set up scholarships, and of course, at heart they have innovation and entrepreneurship, and this led to their key donation to the LSE. Audrey, in making the donation through the Family Foundation, said of entrepreneurship at the LSE that we have perhaps the most diverse body of students on the planet, and there's probably no better place for entrepreneurship excellence. So with that, I want to welcome Eric, who's going to speak for a while, and then that'll be followed by questions and answers. He's going to talk appropriately about getting started.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My family and I are related. To be able to help here at the London School of Economics and opens up some doors and worlds for you that you might not have thought of. One of the things that I realized was when I was here in the 80s, I enjoyed it, but I did not hear the word entrepreneur until 1988. So somehow or another I missed it when I was here, and it probably changed my life if I had heard it a little earlier. And so that was kind of the idea behind sponsoring this program here for my family. The short version of my talk is get started, and now I'll give you the slightly longer version. So I didn't look up what the word entrepreneur meant, or a definition of entrepreneurship until yesterday, but there was this guy in the 1700s, Cantillon, I think, an Irish, French economist, and he said non-fixed income earners who pay known costs of production but earn uncertain incomes. I'm going to read more of this guy's work because that is spot on. It is just phenomenal. And then sort of you move forward to the 1970s, and this professor from Harvard, Stevenson, not a bad definition, the pursuit of opportunity without regard to resources currently controlled. As long as you include risk and everything else can go wrong in resources, I actually like that one as well. So then sometimes I have to describe for people like, what is entrepreneurship? And it means so many different things to people, but the example that I like, somebody wrote, and they said that it had the, every time you make an important decision, there's some existing choices, and you pick one and make it fit. An entrepreneur will think about it, think about the best, and implement that best. Not a bad way to think about it either. So I sort of high-level thought on entrepreneurship. I think it's critical commercially and socially. I don't think entrepreneurship really exists in government, large corporations, and large organizations. We'll get into that another day. And why do I think it's important? I think that there's problems that the government and large corporations can't solve, and for a whole bunch of reasons don't want to solve. And it's an opportunity for folks like you to solve them. So, in order to give you a little bit of context to my views, Al touched on my background, but I had a normal upbringing, very normal family life, upstate New York. But as a youth, I showed zero indication of academic, entrepreneurial, or any other promise. After a curious route to college in the United States, I came to LSE, the recommendation of another professor, shocked that they gave me a scholarship to come here. And so by the time I arrived at LSE, I was a confirmed socialist on my way to being a communist, and I was just elated when I could study at the British Library and channel my inner Karl Marx. It was just in my own element. 6 months later, I was a capitalist, and I would have been a rare earth metal trader here in London, except for the firm that agreed to hire me went bankrupt 2 months before graduation. So I scrambled and got a law school to let me in without the LSAT, and decided that that was a place to go and hang out for safe haven for a while. Then I made partner at a big law firm, and about 3 months after that, I realized I was miserable, and that was not going to be my calling. And so my wife, my one-year-old son, my wife was supportive of me. I quit and went and tried to find what I wanted to do next. In that interim period, my wife developed breast cancer, and she couldn't work in the corporate world anymore. So she bought her first company, took 30 grand, bought this little 2-person company, and so she was off into the races. So I needed a job, I needed something to do. So I decided investment banking was my next calling. It's a great job. Many of you will take it. The reason you'll take it is because you got to pay student debts, I get it. Or your parents are sick of supporting you, so you just got to go get a real job. And so it's awesome. You'll think you're king of the hill, but you're not. You're just a highly paid intermediary. And so that was not fulfilling for me either. I was next hired by a telecom company, about a 400-person company, and they promoted me far beyond my skill level to CEO, only to discover I'm horrible at operations, and I bankrupted the company after 6 months. So it's 1998, and I recognized that my wife was far happier than me running small companies. So I decided to jump into that world. I probably didn't have that many other choices, but I probably could have found something else to do. In any event, I had no clue what I was doing. It was everything from simple tasks to like how do you identify a good business plans, none of the stuff I knew anything about. I could do wickedly complex financial models, but at the end of the day, that's really not what it's about. Since then, my wife and I have started over 20 companies and invested in over 50 others, everything from services, medical device, patent licensing, software. There's really no limits on what we'll look at, invest in, or start. And if we think that somebody's, either we figure it out, a better way to do it, or somebody comes to us who's figured out with a better way to do it, we're in. Only limitation is time and money, and sort of the key is trusted management. You can spend a ton of time doing due diligence. I recommend you spend time on what kind of person it is. Go out and eat dinner with them or whatever, because it's by far the most important asset when these companies are coming along, because that person is the one that's going to make money or make the project work or not. So, personal favorites where I've been involved. I have a predictive analytics company that I've owned for 7 years and shoveled a ton of money in, and I think it's about finally to turn itself around. It's relevant to big data, something we bought a number of years ago, thinking that might be a trend as opposed to just collecting it. Somebody might want to eventually analyze it someday. And then socially, my favorite one is one that my son identified for us about 6 months ago, and it was 2 chefs. And what they do, they take at-risk kids, and that means a nice way of saying kids who are otherwise in prison. And they teach them about life by putting their work in restaurant and food service business. I just thought it was one of the most creative things that I'd ever heard, and was excited to support that one. So I struggled with a little bit about what to talk to you about tonight, so I thought maybe the most relevant thing was what would I wish I'd known in 1998 that I know now? So I came up with a quick list. The first one is, and I was horrible at this, the entrepreneurial or big idea. I started out thinking that the idea had to be earth-shattering that you came up with. I was wrong. simple example is footwear. It's been around forever, Sumerian times, maybe a little earlier, but significant innovation constantly showing up in this area, and that's one that kind of sticks in my mind for some reason. Incremental improvement is all that it takes. It's much more common to improve on existing product or service than it is to come up with something that's never been done before. You don't need to do it. And look at the history of Facebook. They weren't the first. So then, what is the best source of inspiration for these ideas? This is another one you'll struggle with. Like, how do they come to you? I hear about these aha moments. Not really how it works. So I think the best way to get to these ideas is walking around, talking to people, and just living. Best ideas we have found or seen involve making some day-to-day problem less of a problem. Hailing a cab, expensive private car services. Uber, this is an awesome idea. I am so bummed I missed that one. And it's just phenomenal if you think about it from that perspective. Make sure that when you're going through the analysis stage that you read and interact in a variety of areas. Avoid the temptation to focus on one area. You'll find that in industry and other areas that they will have solved problems that were unsolvable in the other one, and it's important that you don't miss out that on the evaluation stage. I'm big into multidisciplinary approach in the evaluation stage, but don't let it become groupthink or a committee decision. It's not how entrepreneurialism works, but again, in the analysis stage, important to do it. Test your ideas. This one's not going to be popular, but choose your partners carefully. I hope someone will study this in more depth, but my experience is that success in these types of endeavors is really more about singular focus than it is a shared vision. When there are no investors, no money in the bank, you can't make payroll, and you don't have money for food, that's not a shared experience. That's very unique to you, and you might want to keep that in mind. I want you to note, though, view with skepticism anybody who tells you they got there without anybody's help. Help and partnering, two very different things. You're going to need help. The other thing that I wish I had thought more about before I started was be prepared to change and refine your ideas. I hung on to some things just dogmatically that were awful. I thought they were the greatest thing in the world. They just weren't. Sort of a step down from that is in the reality of execution. My wife and I call the reality of execution. You're going to find that you have to change your ideas. It's just refinement. It's awesome that you thought you were going to go left when, in fact, you have to go a little right first and then left. But knowing that you have a plan to reform and a plan to modify is a good thing. Make sure on proving feasibility that you understand what bootstrapping is, and I think that you're going to find more and more that without proof of feasibility, that it's going to be really difficult to make money. So when you're putting your ideas together, you might want to think about how it is that you're going to get to the point where you can raise money. So the raising money point. Raising money is the worst. Actually, not raising it when you really need it is slightly worse, but it's still horrible. And I've seen more great ideas just get consumed by the mission to raise money. It just consumes these CEOs. And so just think about that. It's going to take you much longer to raise money than you think it is. So when you're sort of in your planning stage, make sure that what you're thinking about is all right, how can I get this thing to feasibility so I can get Kleiner Perkins to put money into it? They're just not going to throw money at you because you went to the LSE. The other one is that when everybody thinks you're wrong. So I would reflect upon that. If everybody says your idea doesn't make sense, silly, not going to work, you definitely want to think about that. But at some point in time, you can't let the masses deter you. Particularly on the social and commercial side, there's a playbook. And people are put off by it, not put off like angry, but put off like don't understand it when you don't play by that playbook. So I've seen some of the ideas that y'all have brought to your professors on both the social and commercial side, and from what I've seen, those are some pretty good ideas. And it doesn't seem like you all are going to be as restricted as I was by the playbook, but just catch yourself and make sure you're not falling into that trap. And obviously, for people who tell you you're wrong, part of the reason your idea is a good one is because they don't get it, and you're going to go execute on it. So don't be bothered by it. Embrace it. One of the things I also wish I'd known was that there are a ton of resources available to you that you're not really thinking about, and you should use them. I know they talk about networking. I think that's a little bit overdone, to tell you the truth. But there are successful people in a particular area. And what I find, particularly once they sort of hit like my age, 50 or above, that they're willing to talk to you. They might even have coffee with you. I've even had people that I've needed help and that they've gone out to dinner and they didn't know me from Adam. So tap into that. Worst thing they're going to do to you is say no, don't worry about it. And the reason you want to talk to them is that you want to make new mistakes. Okay, so it's don't repeat the ones that have already been made and can easily be avoided, and that sounds so obvious, but I wish somebody had told me that, because I should have talked to more people before I started a number of the companies that I started. And then sort of that's brother is know what you don't know. So particularly on simple tasks, the first time I had to set a bank wire, it took a week. I could have asked somebody, it would have been out the door in 5 minutes. So these little skill sets that you don't really value because you're not thinking about them, they're actually quite valuable. This one is just something you should be aware of, the reality versus the dream. You have no idea how hard it's really going to be. If you did, you'd never do it. It's much easier just to collect a paycheck 9 to 5 and enjoy the weekends and holidays. When you actually do this for a living, you're never really off. Work nights, work weekends, I don't even think about it anymore. You're constantly under stress. Even when things are going great, that's stressful for a whole different set of reasons. So it becomes really consuming. And when you raise money, it doesn't get any better, because all they do is raise expectations and expect better execution, which makes a pressure-packed situation even worse. And so I hear many people say, enjoy the journey. The reality is the journey's at time is brutal, and it is fun to look back and say, oh, that was awesome over time, but there will be periods when you're just out of money, people knocking at the door for rent, whatever it is, vendors, critical vendors, and it's not so awesome. So, if you look at it, your chances of success to just survive 3 years, I think is about 20%. Your chances of financial success is less than 5%. I saw some statistic today, it's 0.4%. And so the best description is sort of, moments elation surrounded by years of doubt and fear. But when it clicks, it's awesome. I'm an adrenaline junkie. I do all kinds of things, jump out of planes, whatever. And there's nothing like the feeling when this thing clicks. It's worth it. So I encourage you to do it, even though there's a few little risks that you're probably not thinking about right now. Particularly for students. Look, y'all got into LSE, so chances are, as a young adult, you haven't experienced a whole lot of failure. And I want to assure you that getting a low grade in Calc 4 feels a lot different than having to lay off 10 employees that were loyal to you and followed you, and you just don't have the money to pay them anymore. It's like, ugh, worst feeling in the world. So if you thought about it, more reasons not to start than to start. Prudent, thoughtful assessment, of course, is appropriate. Knowing all the risks, you're not going to do it. Having answers to all the questions, you're not going to do it. Just get comfortable with that. And lastly, you can learn a lot from your failures. Success, my wife says, tends to remind me of how brilliant and good-looking I am. And so you have to be careful of that, particularly if you enjoy success in the early stages. And with failure, it allows you to make mistakes, new mistakes the next time, and brings you back to earth. So, final thought. Being a non-fixed income earner, frightening, motivating, and thrilling all at the same time. It's not for everyone, but my family and I are excited to be able to help promote the study and encourage the experience of entrepreneurship at one of the world's great universities. So for me, the most important part of entrepreneurship is getting started. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. So we now have a little time for questions and answers. So questions for Eric. We have roving mics. So perhaps the gentleman above. If you could say your name and perhaps who you are before you ask.
Well, David Stringlamar, Fortis Consulting, London, but also the chairman of the Institute of Directors, City of London. So first of all, I want to congratulate you on obviously putting this great venture together. Of course, the IOD, and particularly the City of London, is very focused on helping business succeed and obviously also helping entrepreneurs succeed. So I'm very grateful for Dr. Carol O'Connor for inviting me along, and no doubt she'll keep me abreast of all the things that you're going to do. My question, I was very interested, you spoke about organisational entrepreneurship and perhaps how it does not exist. And obviously a lot of effort and research goes into trying to make organisations, medium and large, actually have and create entrepreneurship. Could you explain that a little bit more, why it might not exist, and if it doesn't exist, how we can actually encourage it to exist? Thank you.
It doesn't exist. I work with a lot of big companies. I've not seen it at one of them. They say it, they'll say entrepreneurial spirit, they'll say entrepreneurial this, entrepreneurial that. We have a skunk works that doesn't have to report to management, blah, blah, blah. It's not true. So I just haven't seen it, so that's why I'm a bit skeptical of it. I hope that somebody studies it and so I guess one of the first problems is to bring some definition to it. And then after you bring definition to it, figure out. So you saw like HP split up today, and part of the justification was, a more entrepreneurial group. Well, good luck. You're still going to have 25,000 people at either one with 14 levels of management. It's just never going to be entrepreneurial. But there may be something that they can do that gets them closer to that. So if I look at one analogy, a sort of special forces in the military, I think it's pretty close. And it'd be interesting to sort of study that and think about that. Still report in, but it's getting really close. So again, from an academic perspective, I don't know. I just know from a real world perspective, I haven't seen it.
Maybe I can just add a few words to that. The idea of intrapreneurship is fairly new, but it is becoming increasingly important, I think. You've got large organizations, and you look at their performance versus local organizations in countries, and you find that small local organizations actually outcompete the large organizations, not because of resource reasons, obviously, but because they're simply less adept and less agile in terms of understanding what the market needs. And so you have now firms that I think are investing quite heavily into training and giving enough time to some of their employees to really sort of embed skills that have to do with, we're a large organization, we're relying on past successes, what's next? And in a sense, I think there's very little thinking around that and very little investments, but I think that investment is also growing. So the notion of, I think, intrapreneurship is growing alongside interest in entrepreneurship. And that's certainly something as a unit that we want to look at. Yeah,
and I'd be a strong advocate of investing on that side because they're just doing it wrong right now, but there's got to be a way to do it.
We have a question over there.
One topic you didn't address, sorry, Guillaume Touchard, I'm an alumni and I work for Orange in the UK. One topic you didn't address was the environment, regulatory, economic environment. I come from France, and obviously entrepreneurs in France, it's better to be an entrepreneur in the UK or in the US than an entrepreneur in France. Do you think it's critical when you want to start a business to choose the right place to start it?
Yeah. So my wife and I have tried in France twice. There will not be a number 3. And so, look, I think they're trying. The young finance minister who was there 3 years ago, I think it was, I spoke to him and just tried to explain what our view was as to why things weren't working. And he just said, the political realities of and the power of labor are such that we just couldn't do what you wanted to do. Having said that, look, if you look down in Grenoble, there's some pretty cool medical device stuff going on. Out closer on the outskirts of Paris, you have some interesting things going on in the farmer space out near Versailles. So they're trying. But my view is look, if it's easier to do it in the UK or the US, just do it there. And I'll tell you this too. So you don't have to fly to Palo Alto. Okay, so that's another thing that I hear from European entrepreneurs. The first thing they want to do is somehow get out to the West Coast of the United States. I think it's important to be connected there. You don't have to be there. That's a little like community cult of all its own. And they look at the world very differently. Go out there, connect with whoever you need. Don't recommend locating there either. But I do think that's a tough one. I mean, I love France. I like to spend time there, but it's just too hard to do business there.
Okay, we have a question over there.
Hello. My name is Carsten Sorensen. I'm one of the locals from Department of Management, but I also was part of an unsuccessful startup last year. So the question I have, which I think is interesting for us in academia, is how important was it for you, or has it been for you in your career, academic insight? So we were very close to getting investments, second round investments, and one of the investors says, yes, but I tend to stay away from academics in startups because that's too much theory and too little action. So it'll be interesting, I think, for me and for us to hear, because you have an academic background, and so is it just getting started and don't care about, we all hear Lord Sugar in this country who is very proud of not having any academic credentials. So there seems to almost be a divide where entrepreneurship is seen as, well, I'm not academic, so I can be an entrepreneur. So I would like your comments on that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So look, for a populist story, there's nothing more I like to hear than somebody who graduated from 8th grade who made $1 billion. I think that's awesome. But I do think that there's a role, and we wouldn't have invested in this if we didn't believe that. We absolutely think there's a role for academics, both in the sense that it would be interesting to see if people can start to say, what really makes these things successful? There just doesn't appear to be any pattern to me, and I can't figure it out. Then your direct question of academics in business. Yeah, you have to be a little bit different because they're not, they sometimes worry about things that they shouldn't worry about, and they're very uncomfortable once they get out of whatever their PhD thesis topic is. But the predictive analytics company I told you about is run by a professor and 2 PhDs out of the University of Minnesota. When you have a group like that, you have to keep a really flat organization with just one directive, and you can't constantly be changing directives because they don't get it. But as long as you have a relatively fixed mission and product plan, I actually happen to like investing in academics. The number one attribute I look for is smart. Agile is the second one. So I don't think there's, I can see a VC saying that, but whether or not they really believe it or not, it's a different question.
I should mention that we had a speaker, Peter Thiel, recently, who talked about his fellowships, and his fellowships are in fact sort of intended to get people out of university and into entrepreneurship and paying them for doing that. So it's a scholarship to basically get a better entrepreneurial education outside universities. Okay, yeah, we have a lady, just a lady there.
Hi, I'm Dr. Shiva Tambishetty from the Law Department. I teach and write on patent law. So you forgive me if I was a little disappointed that you didn't speak a lot about IPNAV, which I was hoping you would. I'd like to know from you what you would say to your critics who dislike the fact that you've made an extraordinary success of a particular kind of dysfunction in the law. And through that response, whether you would care to say something about any sort of civic responsibility that is associated with successful entrepreneurship.
So when you use words like dysfunction to describe something, you sort of prejudge the issue, but I'm comfortable
yeah, no,
with that.
I understand, but I think there are a lot of critics who would say lots of patents that were enforced by your company should not have been granted in the first place, or that the enforcement takes advantage of uncertain boundaries in the law about what is valid and what's not valid. And I think that's a very pertinent question, certainly for the US system, but also to some extent for the UK, where we have less of an issue with the winner wins legal fees issue in the court system. But I think it's something that we need to be increasingly aware of in the UK. So I'd just like to know what you...
Yeah, so with the UPC coming, you should be increasingly aware of it, because
I think we should all be scared with the UPC, but no, I mean with the change in legal fees, I think patent trolling, again, it's not a particularly nice term, but I think patent trolling is going to become a bigger problem in the UK. But I think I'm really interested to hear about your ideas and thoughts on civic responsibility, if any, that goes with successful entrepreneurship.
So I don't equate patent licensing and civic responsibility at all. So look, and I don't want to bore the rest of the crowd, a patent's a right to exclude, okay? It's plain and simple. And you can talk about invalid. We've had one invalidated, okay, out of 6,000. I think you should probably read some of Mark Shankerman's work, who's here, probably, in my view, the best scholar in the space. doesn't have an agenda, calls it down the middle, and I think that, he eloquently states the case, both sides of it, and you can be on either side of it, in an article that he's going to have published, I think, in January.
Thank you. Okay, yeah.
Hi, my name is Bassem Al-Ahmadi. I co-founded a startup last year while I was studying at the LSE called Global Risk Insights. I was just wondering, while I was studying at the LSE, there's this kind of conventional wisdom, not amongst the students, but just generally, that you would need to sort of gain a couple years experience at a big firm for 3, 4, 5 years, be part of that sort of, get that experience, get, career development, and then you'll have the experience to then start up something. Obviously I went against that, but I don't know what you think of that conventional wisdom. I just wanted to get your insight on that.
Look, I understand the reality is that, some of you with massive student debt have to go to a little more certain environment than a startup because you're going to pay it back. So put that aside, or you've been living off your parents and you got to pay them back. So you have to take a more stable position with Goldman or whatever. But good from a context perspective, to the extent you need it. Interesting to see how they operate. One of the things I do is that if I can't make a decision, then I write down and I'm like, what would one of my big former employers do? And then I do something else. So I think that has value. But I think that's what's cool about this program, and what's dawned on me is that since I don't know what makes entrepreneurs successful, I don't think you need that, 2 years at Goldman or 2 years at, whatever hedge fund. And it's not horrible to do it to make sure that that's not what you want out of life. And it's a lot easier to go from Goldman to entrepreneur than it is from entrepreneur to Goldman, which may be impossible. So you just want to think about whether or not you're foreclosing possibilities. But in general, I don't think there's anything significant that forces you to go into big business and then jump out. But it's a pretty common practice, and I think what happens to many of the people is they just realize how miserable they are, and they can't take it, they don't know what it is, and then that's the path they follow. But lucky you for jumping into business first. That's awesome.
Thank you. All right, we'll take one more question. That lady in
Hi, my name's Mary. I guess I am no longer an LSE student. I just finished. I'm heading back to Kansas City to start a startup with my best friend, and the reason that we chose not to do it in London is because it's too hard for visa reasons. But I have a question about funding and when to walk away from funding. So we're just getting started, and hopefully we'll have lots of people wanting to fund us very soon. But when do when is it too soon to accept funding, and when do you say no to funding?
Okay. Just real quick, what business?
Well, it's a
high level.
Yeah, fashion,
service,
e-commerce.
E-commerce. Okay.
Yeah.
Tough space. The general thing that I find is that, and it's not directed towards them personally, it's just sort of their mentality, is that VCs will talk to you for months on end, and 6 or 7 months into the process, they'll reject it for a reason they'd given you an hour after they met you. So I tend to do it a little bit differently, to the extent that the reason my wife's not here tonight, one of her companies is doing its first, she never took outside money, she just wanted to always be in control, but this is a little bit too big, and so she's actually doing it. And the way we ran the process is that sort of the classic 2-pager, if you're interested, let us know, and give them incremental additional information, but you have to tease them into the process. If you just throw everything at them, it's too much. So that rapport that you'll develop with them, and relatively early on whether or not this is the type of a group you want investing with you, and obviously if you get Kleiner Perkins to throw money at you, that's awesome, take that under any terms. But I think that even in the United States, more classic sort of, bootstrap, friends, family, and because what I don't want to do is if I really believe in my idea, I'm going to hit an inflection point at some point with not using a whole lot of money, and so if I really believe in it, why would I get myself diluted now? So I encourage you to sort of look at your business model, figure out where those inflection points are, and take in investment either shortly after, depending on your perspective, or well before. So when you hit those inflection points and you do your next round, you're not going to be diluted down to nothing. There's nothing worse than having a great idea, and this has happened to me, where I ended up, I'd rather own 10% of $1 billion company than 100% of $1 million company. That's a no-brainer, but ended up with about 3% of a company that turned out to be pretty valuable, but I just overfinanced it, and so it's a classic mistake people make. Hope that helped. I know it's a tough question.
Thank you, Eric. A very quick one? Okay.
Hi, I'm a MSc student, just finished. I had a question for you. You are a very great, unique combination of entrepreneurship, but also helping people. I like supporting now a startup, which is also our ONG, helping to buy coffee directly from the farmers in Colombia. But then my question is, do you think it's possible to be a successful entrepreneur, but at the same time helping people? Because I find my project very interesting, because we are paying better price to the farmers and cutting taxes for them and all the export thing, but at the same time I'm seeing we're not making money.
Yeah, look, if that's what drives you, then absolutely, of course you can. I mean, there's no, it's weird, there's no distinction, not distinction is the wrong word, but you can be a capitalist and want to do good as well. If helping farmers, aggregate and get better rates when they're dealing with the Starbucks of the world is what floats your boat, I think that's awesome. And somebody else had one where they were doing, they were going to help the local merchants buy in bulk in some country in Africa. I don't remember what. One of you floated this idea around. So as I read through those, I was like, this is really good. Somebody else had stickers that they were going to put on the back of bus seats, I think in Ethiopia or whatever, that encourage people to call to get better health care. And somehow they figured out they were going to make money with that. I think those ideas are phenomenal. And again, if that's what motivates you, absolutely go for it. And it's absolutely achievable.
Okay, thank you very much. Eric, do join me in thanking Eric.